Hello, everyone. Hi, welcome to the webinar about user-defined properties in DFdiscover 2019. We'll be reviewing this new feature in DFdiscover 2019 and showing you how you can improve your data management processes. My name is Laura Joldersma. I work at the DFnet software office in Dundas, and I also work with the data management team in Seattle. I've been with DFnet for about 4 years now, but I've been using DataFax since 2003, so I've been using it for quite a while. So I'm going to start off by sharing a few highlights from the latest release of DFdiscover, which is version 4.2. And then I'll be going into more depth into specifically user-defined properties, what they are, how you might find them useful in your organizations. We'll have about 10-15 minutes at the end of the session for any questions. So just a couple of housekeeping notes. We are recording this webinar so that others can watch it at a later time. So I will be muting your lines for the time being. And if you do have any questions during the presentation, you can type them into the message box in the chat box in GoToMeeting, and we'll address them at the end. I did want to mention a little bit about the situation here at DFnet in light of COVID-19. We know that the current situation really poses a lot of challenges for everyone, for clinical research within your organizations, as well as all in our personal lives. We're concerned for everyone, and we are ready to help as needed. Our physical offices in both locations in Dundas and Seattle are closed, but the business is open. We are all available to provide support while we work remotely from our homes. For the support team, the most effective way to reach us is by email. So support@datafax.com is the best way to get in touch with us rather than calling by phone. Please do let us know if there's anything we can do to help to support you during this time. We are ready. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us for this webinar. We know there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of challenges for many different reasons, and we're really grateful for you as our community. So we'll get started talking about some of the highlights of DFdiscover 2019, which came out late last year. I'm going to go over most of these pretty quickly. We won't spend too much time on them. The two in this list that I'm going to cover in detail today are the user-defined properties as well as the metadata exports, which kind of go hand in hand with that. So the first major change is updates to the desktop client login screen. So there's a lot more real estate we're using up, so you have a lot more space to add any messages to your end users. There's a dflogin.html now fully supports HTML5, and so you can share all sorts of information there, which we've personally found really helpful. Another cool new feature is that if users only have access to one study, they actually just skip the study selection dialog now, and so they just go directly into their study. We've also made several updates to DFWeb, which is our browser-based data collection app, as well as to DFCollect, which is our tablet-based online-offline data collection app. And so there's lots of great improvements in the latest version of these two applications. They both support nearly all of the edit checks, so there's a lot more power in this than in the previous version. And we're continuing to make improvements to both applications. We've also updated what the dashboard view looks like in DFexplore. We've added some options to display the reports in dashboard a little bit differently. And within each report, you can also easily close, open in a new window, or refresh the contents of each of the parts in dashboard. So there's a lot of visual reports that you can add to the dashboard. So previously there were just the four tabs available. But now you can actually select any of the visual reports that you can run within the reports view and just see them directly within your dashboard, which is really great. You can see there's all sorts of information you could look at. You could be able to see at a glance right within dashboard view whenever you first log in. So giving you a nice overview of what the study looks like, what the status is, how enrollment is going. And also within reports view, we've added a button so that you can pin that report to the dashboard. So when you're running a report with specific parameters, say right within reports view, you can actually just pin that to your dashboard so you'll see that next time you log in. So we've changed the view a little bit in how you can display the reports. So traditionally, we've just allowed you to see it in 2 columns, but now we've updated it so that you can also choose to watch it, to look at the reports in 1 column, or with full screen with a scrolling index along the left-hand side. So you can not only just see your reports with a full width in the main part of the screen, but you can also easily navigate between the different reports that you have available on your dashboard. We've also added some new visual reports. Here's the query status trend report, which has a few different display options showing how the distribution of resolved and unresolved queries change over time. And so we want to keep adding and growing our repository of reports that we have available. So we're hoping this one's helpful, and we're accepting new ideas for new reports and trying to build in as many as we can right within the software. So custom reports are less important. We've also made some updates to existing reports. Here's the enrollment by site report, which we included in DFdiscover 2018, but we've updated it now to include a couple of trend lines. So there's one trend line showing the best fit based off the actual data, as well as a linear from start to end date trend line. So you can see, you can sort of project how enrollment's going to go based off, what's actually happened so far, and also just based off the time period that's available for enrollment. We've also added color palettes within the reports view. So our default palettes are still there, our default colors, but if you want to add in your own custom color palettes, we have some in there, and you can also add your own remove hours, and there's a lot of flexibility for colors within the reports as well. And of course, we've made some security updates. As technology changes over time, we always need to keep up with the latest. And so we've added that in, and the protocol and cipher both are shown in all of the desktop clients as well to visually confirm the secure connection to the server. So that's a quick overview of some of the new features in DFdiscover 2019. And so now I'll talk about specifically user-defined properties, which is a flexible new tool. It gives you a lot of different options, and we hope that it provides you a way of addressing some data management challenges. So before I get into the details of this new feature, I'm going to talk a little bit about why we've added them as a new feature and what data management processes we think will be useful. And we would love to hear, sort of keeping these in mind, we'd love to hear sort of how you think you might be able to implement them yourselves in your own studies and your own organizations. So one of the primary motivators for implementing the user-defined properties as a new feature was CDISC. So because of some complexities with CDASH and STTM, for example, there are a lot of variables within CDASH that are actually, they're not fields that are actually collected on the CRF from the site, for example. They're actually just information about the variables that are being collected. So it's usually shown as text on the CRF as part of the question text, not actually collected as data. So we had a bunch of different methods of dealing with this, but we found that a lot of those are very awkward. They took a lot of work. And so user-defined properties are now what we use to extend the existing properties within the software, custom for each study, in order to include in the database build phase we're able to add that information in during the database build process and then include that in the data export at a later time. Just want to check in with everyone that you can still hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just to remind everyone that we will be recording this. We'll be recording this session, and so we will make the recording available online, hopefully with the silent bit in the middle removed. So you can revisit if you missed the beginning or you missed any part, we can go back and return to continue on. Okay, so I was talking about CDASH as a primary motivator for adding user-defined properties as a new feature in the software, but there are a lot of other data management processes that can be helped by this new feature as well. So risk-based monitoring, as an example, because you can reference user-defined properties in edit checks, you can actually define now these SDV requirements as part of your plate definition or your field definition, and then using edit checks to identify where SDV is required and where it isn't. So you don't need to, say, build the details within your edit check programming exactly, but you can actually define these as properties within DFsetup and then implement them in your study from there. Another example is database specifications and testing. So this is another place where you can add this extra information as sort of an extension of the existing properties within the study setup. And then because you can export database specifications to Excel, you can reference the specifications within DFsetup and then use that Excel document as a starting point for testing and for documenting what your database specifications are. Protocol and CRF amendment tracking, this can be really complicated because things can change a lot over time within your trial, and keeping track of all those changes and what changes influence the database versus not, that can be hard to keep track of. And so you can think of user-defined properties as a way of extending the properties for the study and say for a plate to document the versioning and then the history of changes over time. In a similar vein, there's a lot of other kinds of information that's useful to document within the database that you would normally otherwise store outside. So similar to the CRF version and protocol version and history of changes tracking, it's really helpful to have that right within the setup definition. So if you have to revisit your study years from now, all of that key information, those important details are right available there within DFsetup, within your setup definition file. So it's easy to revisit that. So these are all some of the data management challenges that we would like you to think about as I sort of talk about what this new feature is and how you might use it. And I'm hoping it sparks some ideas for solutions to challenges you're having. These are just a few examples, and I think there's probably a lot of different specific issues going on in each of your organizations and each of your trials where something like this might come in handy. So keep these 5 ideas in mind as I go through the next slide. I'll use them as examples as I move forward. And I'll be addressing the first 3 specifically in a bit more detail later on. So just to illustrate sort of the overview of the idea of user-defined properties is that you can extend in DFsetup on the left. I'm extending essentially the module properties for this specific instance. So I'm looking at systolic blood pressure in my left arm, and I'm adding that information within my module properties. And so then what that allows me to do is within list view in DFexplore, I can include those properties right within the data set that I'm creating. So I can add those properties within list view and then export that data in a way that looks much more like what CDASH wants us to create. So I'll talk a little bit more about what user-defined properties actually are. So I've mentioned that they're an extension of the current built-in properties. So they're a way of extending what we already provide within the software in a way that suits your specific study, your specific organization. So they are defined in study setup or in DFsetup, and you can define them at the field level, at the module level, the plate level, and the study level. Each user-defined property has a tag and a value, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. And user-defined properties don't really impact anything in terms of data collection in DFexplore, so they're not really something that you add in for your end users in any specific way. It's really something for internally from the setup, the database build process, the database export process. That's really where you're making the most use out of them. And user-defined properties are available within the edit checks language, and they're available within the DFexplore list view as well as in the data export. So a bit more about property tags and values. So those are the 2 components of a user-defined property. So the tag is what defines what the property is for that current study. So you can think of it as a field name or an alias for that property. And you have up to 20 each for the study for plates, modules, and fields. And there's a maximum of 80 characters for each tag. And so you can see in the screenshot on the right, the property tag is the column on the left, and the property value is the one on the right. The property value is assigned per field, per module instance, per plate, and per study as needed. So you don't have to apply a property value on every single field, every single module. You just add them in as you need them. And you reference these values by using the tag or by using the default name. And there's a maximum of 500 characters for the property value. So I'm going to go over, step by step how to actually implement user-defined properties in your studies. But before you start down that path, what you want to do for your own studies is consider what your user-defined properties will actually do. So you do have a limit, so you want to choose carefully. You only have 20 for each of the levels. And you want to consider what's going to give you the most value for the additional setup work. So usually you're going to be adding your user-defined properties during the database build process. And so it will add a little bit of extra work to that process. And so it'll be an extra piece of the setup that people have to add in as they're setting up the CRFs, as they're adding the edit checks. And so you want to make sure that what you're implementing is actually going to give you value at the end of the day. So let's talk about actually implementing user-defined properties. So first you want to define them, and this happens in DFsetup. So you define the property tags and then assign the property values. And then when you come to actually using them, you can use them in DFsetup by referencing in edit checks. You can include that they are included in the setup definition export to Excel. And then in DFexplore, you can display them in list view and include them in data export. So I'll go through each of these pieces in the next slides. So defining property tags in DFsetup. So this is a new dialog within the study menu. User-defined property tags is the option. And so it gives you a dialog that shows 4 columns. And each of these 4 columns is the study, the plate, the module, and the variable. And then within each of those is 20 individual user-defined property tags that are available. So I've sort of organized this in a way to try to illustrate what these different variables are actually, user-defined properties are actually for. So in blue are the CDASH and STTM variables. So under the study column, you can see the first 10 are specifically, these are trial summary variables from SDTM. And so there's length, sponsor, title, trial phase, trial type, study objectives, the registry ID, the study start date, the study end date, and the number of planned subjects. And then if you look over into the module category, the column shows 9 specific CDASH variables. And so you can see that they begin with XX. Generally, or always, CDASH variables start with a 2-letter domain code. But because we want to be able to reuse these CDASH variables across any domain that we want to use in our trial, we decided to use XX. And so when it comes time to convert to SDTM, it'll be easy to convert that XX to the proper domain code because it'll be within the correct module. But in order to make these variables most usable within the study setup, we wanted to start them off with XX to indicate that they can belong to any domain where they're applicable. So those are the blue ones. So the orange ones are related to risk-based monitoring. So on the plate level, we have a risk level and then an indicator of whether SDV is required, and then the same at the variable level. That's the ones in orange. In yellow are the database specifications. So in the study column, you can see open study and open binder. And so these will be the specifications for the DF open study edit check, as well as the open patient binder edit check. So that's where we're going to describe what those edit checks do exactly, because there's a lot of power in those ones, and it's useful to document those both for testing and for knowing what might need to be tweaked over the course of the study. And then at the variable level, we have plate enter, field exit, and plate exit. So these are tags specifically related to edit check specifications. So we want to describe here what the edit checks placed at each of these components within the field properties. We want to describe what those edit checks will actually do, and that's going to help us with our testing plan down the road, which I'll show you later. And finally, the ones in green are the protocol and CRF amendment information. So in the study column, you can see protocol version 1, protocol version 2 date, and then the protocol version 2 history of changes, and then the same for the CRF at the plate level. So this is sort of an example thought process for how you want to use property tags, your tags and your user-defined properties in an example study. So now that we've defined our tags, we're ready to enter our property values. And so we're still in DFsetup, and depending on which level of which property you want to update, you do it in different places within DFsetup. So I'll go into each of these. So at the study level, under the global settings option, that dialog now has a new tab called user defined. And so this is where you add in all your values for the study level information. So we've got our study length, we've got our sponsor, we've got our protocol title, we've got all that trial summary data information, as well as our open study and open binder information there, as well as our protocol versions and the history of changes. So you can just see, I can just update right within my global settings what these values are for my study. Now at the plate level, you're actually applying these values for a specific plate once you've actually created a CRF in DFsetup. So you can see here's plate 6, lab results. And so there's a new tab next to where the help is entered that lists all your user-defined properties. So you can see version 1 date, version 2 date, and version 2 history of changes. So that's the plate level. And then the module level is the module properties for a specific module instance on a plate. So when you're in view modules and you're adding fields to your modules, this isn't where you define this information. You actually only define this part when you've actually created a CRF and you have a module on a CRF and you have module fields on that CRF. And that's when you actually add this information. So it's specific to a module instance on a plate. So here we've got a vital signs module. It's instance number 4. And so it's the module instance is for systolic blood pressure for the left arm, and it's the first repetition number on the CRF. So that's the module level. Here's the field properties level. So I mentioned earlier that the first 4 at the top there are for edit check specifications. So you can see I've added a specification on field exit, so for a legal range check. And then there's also the risk level of medium, and SDV is yes for this specific field, this weight field. So now I've set up my property tags, I've set up my property values, and now I actually want to use them. So you can reference them in the edit checks, as I've mentioned. The 4 edit check functions you can use them in are DF study info, DF plate info, DF module info, and DFR info. Makes a lot of sense because those are the 4 levels we're dealing with. In this edit check example, I want to show a warning if the current date field that the edit check is placed on is before the study start date. And so my study start date is defined as SSTDTC within my study user-defined properties. And so you can see that date is entered within my global settings dialog. And so I want to reference that in the edit check. And so I'm using the DF study info edit check and then using the tag to reference that value. You can also refer to the value using the default name. So the default name, if you don't have a tag defined, you can still use it, but it's definitely recommended to use tags so you know exactly what you're looking at. Another thing to note here is that the property values are all string. So in this edit check, I've used the DF string to date function to convert that string to a date value. So if you're dealing with numeric values, date values, anything that you don't need to be a string, you need to convert that first to the correct variable type and then use it within your edit check. So user-defined properties are also included in the setup export to Excel. You don't need to do anything extra for this. This just gets included when you export it. So for the study level user-defined properties are included in the global settings tab, plates, modules, and then the plate schema tabs are where each of the different levels of user-defined properties are included. So in the screenshot here, you can see the last several columns are specifically the user-defined properties. So there's coding. After the coding column, there's plate enter, field exit, plate exit, and then the risk var and SDV var columns. So now we're out of DFsetup, we're into DFexplore. So we're not worried about actually collecting the data. We're not actually worried about entering data within the CRFs. We just want to include these user-defined properties within list view. And so this is another feature that I mentioned that's new in DFdiscover 2019, where we've updated the field selection dialog to allow metadata to be included in data exports. So this allows both data and metadata to be displayed within list view. And so in the dialog, you can see on the left-hand side, the top panel is just the data field. So those are the fields that are within the module or the plate that you've selected within list view. And then below that, the metadata fields, that panel includes all the metadata for all the various levels. So not just your user-defined stuff, but also the built-in properties that are within the software for every study. So you'll only see the user-defined properties that you actually have values for in this panel here, but you can include them right alongside all of the other built-in metadata and the data for the plate or the module. So here's an example showing sort of how to get a mix of data and metadata. So in blue on the left, and then on the right where the display fields are shown, the ones in blue are the module or the plate data. In this case, it's the module vital signs. In orange are the built-in metadata, so that's the default metadata that is in every study. And then in the user-defined metadata is the stuff, are the properties that you've defined specifically for your own study, for this specific study. So you can see it's easy to put together a mix of information and have it display in the order and in the way that you want it. You want to see it within list view. So once you've selected your fields, you've clicked OK, and now in list view you can see the data is displayed in exactly the field selection order that you've identified. So you can see there's XX test, XX location, XX latitude, and repetition number for the vital signs in that plate. So you can obviously export the data directly from list view to Excel, to CSV, or pipe to limited formats. And you can also export data using the DFexplore command line program. So referencing the user-defined properties as well as the built-in properties in the same way that you see them shown in the field selection dialog will give you the same result from the command line if you want to automate your exports. Okay, so I'm going to just do a bit of a demonstration so you can see what things look like within the actual software. Okay. So everyone should see, hopefully, my DFsetup screen. And so you should be looking at my vital signs CRF. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some tags and add some property values for my study. So I'm going to study user-defined property tags. So you can see what I've set up before, what I showed you earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a version 3 for my protocol, because I've just had a protocol change related to COVID-19, which I'm sure some of you have started or are thinking about in your own studies. And so I'm going to add a way to document those versions. So both the change in the protocol as well as in the CRF. So I'm going to add in a version 3 for both of those. So I'm just adding in my tags. I save them. And so what I'm going to do now is update my global settings to include that protocol information. So I've got my protocol version 1 and version 2, and so now I'm going to add in version 3 with today's date. I'm going to say add a new section describing remote subject visits and assessments and remote site monitoring. So we're adding to our protocol some information about how to, I'm going to actually add in due to COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm documenting right away within my global settings the update to my protocol. I'm going to go to my subject visit CRF, and we've made a change to the subject visit. This is an eCRF, so I don't have a background that I'm updating, but I do have an update I need to make for this version. So here I have my CRF version 3 change here. So I'm going to add in the date. I'm going to say addition of question, whether visit is remote or not. So I'm going to apply that. I'm just going to add in a field that I've already defined previously to indicate whether this visit was remote or not. I'm just going to reorder it so I put it in the right place. I'm going to add it right below the visit date and then click OK. So now we've added a new field. We've updated the version of the CRF, and we can see that change within the setup itself. I'm going to save setup just to make sure I don't lose any of my work. And then I'm going to export setup to Excel. I'm just going to export everything. I'm going to put on today's date. So now you can see I have my Excel file has been opened. So the title sheet shows just an overview, and then my global settings tab, you can see now has that information included in it, the value, the property tag, as well as the property value. And then I'm going to go look at the plates tab, and so we can see here's the subject visit, CRF, and we can see, yep, there's CRF version 3, the date, as well as the reference to what the actual change was on the CRF. And you know, typically you check for typos before you actually save your setup file, but not today. So that's in DFsetup. That's updating what's within your actual setup definition. So now I'm going to go into DFexplore. So I'm going to go into list view in my DFexplore. And I think what I want to do is I just want to create a sort of a visit summary of my data. So I'm going to go, my visit information, the common identifier and timing information is within my header module. So I'm going to go select my header module. By default, I just see all the information in that module. There's a lot of stuff in here I don't really want to see, and there's also stuff missing that I don't have in here. So I'm going to do is go to select, field selection. And then I'm going to select what exactly I want to include. So let's say I'll have the study number, sure, plate number, visit number, subject ID, obviously. Don't really care what the module is. I want the visit date, and I'll just have the creation date and the modification date. I just want a summary of what visits I have in this study. This isn't really a lot to go on. You just have the plate number, the visit number. So what about, I want the study name. So you can see in the metadata fields panel here, I've got image properties, site properties, study properties. So I'm going to add my study name. So I'm just going to add the plus sign to add that in, but I don't want to put it here. I want to put it up next to the study. So I'm going to drag and drop that up there. I want to have the plate name as well. So I'm going to go to the plate properties and get the plate description and add that in there as well. And then the visit, let's see, I have the visit label I want to add in there. It's a lot easier for me to look at this in Excel if I have the labels rather than the numbers. Fine with the visit subject ID, but because I'm going to get all plates, I actually want to get the visit date from the visit instead of the visit date from this module, because it won't actually be showing up on everyone. So I'm going to add this visit date here, and I'm going to remove the visit date from the module itself. I'm going to get it specifically from the visit. So we have study number, study name, plate number, plate description, visit number, plate label, subject ID, and then the visit date. I'm going to put the subject ID after the study just to make that a bit more clear. And that looks good. So now I have a nice summary of the plates and the visits and the visit dates, along with the creation and modification dates. For all of the data, for basically all of the plates, all of the data within my study. So I'm just going to export that to Excel. I'm going to say, here's my visit summary. I'm going to call it a data summary with today's date. So now you can see it's nicely laid out in Excel. I can see the plate names, the visit names, the dates, as well as the creation and modification date. So a lot better than fooling around with a custom report or a custom export. You can do it easily right now directly within DFexplore. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. So I'm just going to go through those 3 examples that I mentioned at the beginning in a bit more detail, just to give you another sense of the types of solutions you can add into your studies for these. So going back to the CDASH example, so I was mentioning before that we tried a bunch of other different types of solutions for implementing those CDASH variables that aren't actually data collection fields, how to get those into the database. And so you can see all the little blue fields in there. Those are hidden constant fields that we were using previously, and they really got in the way. You had to have edit checks in there to navigate around them. And so using user-defined properties added within the module instance to store that CDASH information, it keeps our CRF nice and clean. It makes data review and data validation a lot easier. And then similar within list view, if you're looking at the data in a plate-based way, it's not normalized, it's horizontal, it's really not organized in the way that you think about data in terms of CDASH. But when you're using the module-based list view, and you can actually display the data in a nice normalized vertical fashion. Looks a lot closer to what you will need to submit with SDTM, a lot less work to get there. So going back to the risk-based monitoring example. So here we have the weight variable on my vital signs CRF. And so I've assigned the risk level of medium, and I've just indicated that SDV is required. This is a pretty simple example that right now it's not actually incorporating the risk level into the actual requirements for SDV, but that might be something that changes over the course of the study. You could also add in something like a condition for whether SDV is required. So say if the value is over a certain amount, or if a date is before or after a specific date, that SDV might be required. Or you could add in a script that selects a random number of plates to be SDV'd, or keeps track of, say, the first 10 participants in a study who need specific data SDV'd. Excuse me. And so you can incorporate that right into your field properties or right into your plate properties, rather than having to track that, say, in a separate piece of software, in a separate program. You can do it right within the setup definition. So there's a lot going on with this edit check. The main thing I want to draw your attention to is using the DFR info edit check function, and then calling that SDV_var property tag, and then checking what the value is, and then continuing with the SDV edit check based off that value. So, you can add in a lot of other complications, or, build in a lot of more risk-based elements of what, however your monitoring plan is designed. There's a lot of different complicated ways you could deal with things, but it's just an example of taking that information from the properties that you've defined yourself for your study, and then incorporating that into your edit checks. So revisiting database specifications and testing that I mentioned earlier. So here in this example, you can see we have a systolic blood pressure value. I have two edit checks on field exit. There's G_legal range and G_rec_if_b. And these are two edit checks from our global edit checks library. And so that's under the edit checks tab within field properties. This is another new feature in DFdiscover 2019. We've displayed the field properties in a tabbed format, so it's easier to flip between and see all of the information in a tab format, rather than all in one giant long screen. So now the user-defined tab, you can see on the right, I've defined the two specifications for those two edit checks. So I've described that the legal range edit check is to ensure the result is within the legal range. And then the other edit check is required if not done. The value is required if not done is blank, and it only runs in batch. So I put that within my field properties as I'm doing my database build. As I'm adding my edit checks, I'm adding in that specification at the same time. And so then when I export my database setup to Excel, you can see the first 4 columns outlined in orange are plate enter, plate exit, field exit. So those are the actual edit check names defined in setup. And then the ones after coding, that second block of orange, those are the user-defined properties with the specifications defined. And so what we've done in this example is we've written an Excel macro. And so what it does is it takes that export to Excel document and transforms it essentially into a testing plan. It doesn't write the testing plan for us, unfortunately. That's the next step in world domination, but hopefully it's coming. But essentially what it does is it lists out all the variables and the variable specifications, and then the edit check needs to be tested. And then it adds a column for the testing plan and the testing results, so it could just be easily added directly into that Excel file. So rather than copying and pasting and creating a file over and over again as the database is built, you're actually just exporting it directly from DFsetup, transforming it within Excel, and then ready to create your testing plan. So I hope that this webinar has given you some food for thought in terms of what user-defined properties can do for your study. It's easy to create them. At the start of study build, you create your tags, and then as you're doing your study setup, you define those property values. And you can make use of user-defined properties in several ways. You can reference them in edit checks. You can display them in DFexplore list view, and you can include them in your data exports as well. So we're really hoping that this new feature in DFdiscover 2019 will help improve your study processes, and I hope to hear some ideas from you guys in the future or now of how you might use this feature in your own organizations. So let's open it up now for any questions or comments that people have. The question is from Vicken. Hi, Vicken. Does DFSQL load upload user-defined data items? That's a really good question. I don't know it off the top of my head, actually. And Eric has responded, thank you, Eric, that it does not. DFSQL load only uploads the actual data, not metadata at this time. Another question about cost of upgrading to 2019. Eric, did you want to address that one? Or anyone else from Seattle? There's no cost to upgrading. Hopefully that's good news for everyone. There are no other questions. Feel free to get in touch with us if you do have questions in the future. And again, we apologize for the technical difficulties today with the audio. There will be the video of this will be posted online. And so if you did miss anything, we will go back. You'll be able to go back and revisit any parts that you missed. Oh, there's a question from Needy about, is there a direct 2014 to DFdiscover 2019 upgrade? And yes, it can be done directly. There's no extra special process to go through like it was to upgrade to 2014 with the modules. You can directly upgrade from 2014 to 2019. Great, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We really appreciate you taking the time. Oh, sorry, there's another question. Is DFSAS aware of the metadata? No, similar to DFSQL load, it doesn't recognize the user-defined properties at this time. That's something that if there is a specific use case for that, then we can certainly discuss that as part of future releases. We're definitely happy to hear any other ideas for improvements we can make and additions we can make for specific scenarios that you're encountering. So love to hear them. Thank you so much for joining, everyone, and stay safe and healthy, and wish you all the best in this tough time. Please do let us know if there's anything we can help you with.